Monaco's royal family has everything: glamour, wealth, fame, and prestige. But if the legends are true, they also carry a 700-year-old curse that dooms their marriages. Princess Caroline's life, filled with both scandal and tragedy, only seems to reinforce the myth. High society marriages are common in Europe, but Caroline's parents were in a league of their own. In 1957, Rainier III, Prince of Monaco, and Hollywood icon Grace Kelly welcomed their firstborn, making Caroline both Monegasque and Hollywood royalty. However, beneath this dazzling family lineage, dark rumors and eerie conspiracies have always lingered. The Grimaldi dynasty is famous not only for ruling Monaco but also for its long history of misfortune in love. According to legend, a 14th century witch placed a curse on the family, declaring, "Never will a Grimaldi find happiness in marriage." While it sounds like pure fiction, the family's troubled romantic history makes it hard to ignore. And Princess Caroline's life is no exception. If ever there was a real-life, poor little rich girl, it was Princess Caroline. After a childhood marked by neglect, she seemed to inherit the family tradition of scandals and doomed romances. Every one of her marriages ended in heartbreak, whether through bitterness or tragedy, leaving many to wonder, was it simply bad luck, or was something more sinister at play? Caroline's childhood was far from idyllic. Growing up under intense public scrutiny was difficult enough, but even worse was the emotional distance from her own parents. She once admitted, "We were probably closer to our nanny than to our parents." In fact, their nanny could barely take a vacation because the children missed her so much. Adding to the isolation, rumors suggest that the Grimaldi children weren't even allowed to have dinner with their parents. That privilege supposedly came only in their teenage years, by which time the emotional gap between Caroline and her mother was too wide to bridge. And ultimately, she would pay the price for that distance. Caroline was too cool for school, at least in her mother's eyes. Grace Kelly didn't believe university was necessary for her daughter, though she likely meant well. Still, Caroline insisted on pursuing higher education, despite the lack of support. It wasn't just her family who doubted her. One professor even criticized her for taking the place of a more deserving student. But Caroline proved them all wrong, earning her degree in the end. Unfortunately, it turned out that graduation wasn't the kind of ceremony that would truly define her life. Caroline had spent her entire life under pressure, and when it came to marriage, things were no different. If diamonds are formed under immense pressure, so are royal brides. From a young age, she had been expected to find a husband, and she felt the weight of that expectation. As she later admitted, "Since I had been little, everybody wanted me to get married." That pressure led her straight into what would become one of the biggest mistakes of her life. Enter Philippe Junot. A French banker with a reputation for charm, flirtation, and a somewhat flexible relationship with the truth. He was vague about his supposedly aristocratic lineage, elusive about his education, and mysterious about his actual profession. No one knew much about what he did during the day, but everyone knew what he did at night. Unsurprisingly, when he and Caroline first met, at a nightclub, no less, his first words to her were downright insulting. There are many ways to start a romance, but calling a princess a fatty isn't usually one of them. Yet, despite this questionable first impression, their relationship quickly became the talk of the town. At 36, Philippe was nearly twice Caroline's age when they met, while she was just 19. But that didn't stop the media from obsessing over them, documenting every moment of their whirlwind romance, including the not-so-private, steamy ones. So when Philippe finally proposed, the press went wild. Caroline, however, would soon realize that not everyone shared her excitement. Behind the scenes, her engagement was a source of deep concern. Grace Kelly, sensing disaster, confided in her sister, asking, "What do you do, Lizzie, when you know your child is headed for disaster and you can't stop it from happening?" Her sister's response was painfully honest, "You let her get hurt, Gracie. There is no other way. Then you just have to be there to pick up the pieces." Caroline's parents were so alarmed that they even considered preventing the wedding from taking place in Monaco. But in the end, they gave in, hoping for the best while secretly fearing the worst. To the world, Caroline's decision to marry Philippe seemed like an act of youthful rebellion. But the truth was far more complicated. At just 21, she didn't know what she truly wanted, only that she was expected to settle down. She wasn't completely blind to Philippe's flaws either, but she convinced herself that she could change him. "I can fix him," she thought, ignoring the glaring red flags. Caroline barely had time to enjoy being a newlywed before regret set in. "I started to wake up and wonder what I'd done while we were still on our honeymoon," she later admitted. And honestly, who could blame her? Philippe's idea of romance was inviting a photographer to document their private getaway, then selling the photos. It was a humiliating betrayal, and from that moment, their marriage was on borrowed time. Once the honeymoon phase was over, literally, Caroline and Philippe fell into a cycle of constant arguments. And they didn't just fight behind closed doors. Their public clashes became impossible to ignore, drawing even more attention to a marriage that was quickly unraveling. But things were about to get even worse. Caroline had believed she could change Philippe, but the truth was, he had no interest in changing. He wasn't just a flirt, he was the flirt. A wedding ring meant nothing to him, and it didn't take long before people started spotting him at clubs, surrounded by women. His reckless behavior became an open secret, and Caroline was left to deal with the humiliation. She wasn't the only one who noticed, so did the press, the public, and worst of all, her own family. Before long, their marriage became little more than a formality. It didn't go unnoticed that the couple hadn't been seen together in ages. What people did see, however, spoke volumes. Caroline quietly moved out and returned to live with her parents, while Philippe was off traveling the world, with his 25-year-old secretary. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was really going on. Caroline endured the situation for as long as she could, until she couldn't anymore. For a while, it remained unclear whether she would actually go through with a divorce. After all, royal families had a long history of clinging to broken marriages for the sake of appearances. That's why it came as a shock when, after just 2 years, a family spokesperson publicly announced the separation. If the media was caught off guard, so was Philippe. Philippe later admitted he was surprised, to say the least. He went on to claim, "Caroline has her own private life. Our marriage is no more than a formality. There is nothing holding us together." According to him, they had agreed to an informal separation, not an official divorce. Just when it seemed like the divorce was about to turn into a full-blown war, the tension suddenly vanished. And the reason? It wasn't exactly noble. According to rumors, Philippe only agreed to finalize the divorce after Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier III paid him off. Philippe, of course, denied everything, insisting he was completely financially independent. But whether or not he walked away with a secret payout, one thing was certain: Caroline walked away with a brutal lesson. She had learned the hard way that no amount of love, effort, or status could change a man like Philippe. And unfortunately, he would continue proving that. Caroline wanted to move on, but Philippe wasn't ready to let go. Instead, he made it his mission to publicly air his version of their failed marriage. In interview after interview, he blamed everyone, except himself. The press? They ruined things. Caroline's parents? They interfered too much. His only mistake, according to him, was dancing with an old flame. And when Caroline reacted by flirting with other men, he claimed she was just trying to get revenge. But then, he took it even further. If Philippe's past behavior had been shameless, his next comments were downright infuriating. When someone pointed out the hypocrisy of his jealousy, considering his well-documented infidelity, his response was jaw-dropping. "As far as fidelity is concerned, I think as long as the man respects his wife and doesn't make an affair obvious, with that single statement, Philippe proved exactly why losing him was the best thing that could have happened to Caroline. But that didn't mean she walked away unscathed. The marriage may have lasted only 2 years, but the damage lingered far longer. After the divorce, Caroline withdrew from her social circle entirely. Not because they abandoned her, but because she abandoned them. She refused to be surrounded by pity, sympathy, or well-meaning attempts to understand her pain. She later admitted, "I have the feeling of being used, sold like a soap." And just as she was trying to rebuild her life, tragedy struck the Grimaldi family yet again. In 1982, Monaco was rocked by a devastating loss. Grace Kelly and her youngest daughter, Princess Stephanie, were in a horrific car accident. Stephanie survived, but Grace did not. The world mourned an icon. Hollywood lost a legend. Monaco lost its beloved princess. But for Caroline, Stephanie, and their brother Albert, this wasn't just a public tragedy, it was the unimaginable loss of their mother. Amidst the grief, Prince Rainier III made a life-changing decision. At just 25 years old, Caroline was about to face the biggest challenge of her life. After Grace Kelly's passing, Prince Rainier III witnessed what he later described as a miracle. Caroline didn't just step up as Monaco's de facto First Lady, she embodied the role so seamlessly that her father saw echoes of grace in her. Saying no to him was never an option. She later reflected, "I was raised with a sense of duty, obedience, and guilt." And with that, she accepted her new role without hesitation. "What I had to do always came before what I wanted to do." But everything changed the night she met Stefano Casiraghi. He was everything Philippe wasn't, an Italian heir, a world champion powerboat racer, and undeniably handsome. Unlike her first husband, he had both charm and integrity. Just a year after losing her mother, it seemed as though Caroline's life was finally taking a turn for the better. But there was one major complication. Their timing couldn't have been worse. Caroline was already in a relationship with Robin Rossellini, the son of legendary actress Ingrid Bergman, while Stefano was engaged to an Italian socialite. But while Stefano was uncertain about his fiancée, Caroline was absolutely sure that Robin wasn't the one. His infidelity made that crystal clear. It didn't take long for both relationships to fall apart, and for Caroline and Stefano to fall deeply in love. A few months later, the palace made another unexpected announcement, this time, a happy one. Princess Caroline and Stefano had married in an intimate ceremony, with only 20 guests in attendance. The entire event lasted just 20 minutes. But for a family that had endured so much sorrow, this wedding was a moment of hope. A palace spokesperson declared, "Happiness has finally returned to a family which recently has had its share of personal tragedies." If any couple could finally break the so-called Grimaldi curse, it was Caroline and Stefano. At least, that's what everyone wanted to believe, until fate had other plans. But before tragedy struck, there was scandal. The rushed and low-key nature of the wedding raised eyebrows, fueling speculation that Caroline was already pregnant. Sure enough, just months later, she and Stefano welcomed their first child into European high society. But as tabloids dug deeper, hoping to uncover more controversy, they stumbled upon something far more shocking. Stefano was, by all accounts, a devoted husband and a respectable businessman. Caroline even joked that they were the perfect match because he had invested in a shoe company, and few things made her happier than a great pair of shoes. In response, Stefano had custom labels placed inside hers, a small but sweet gesture that showed just how much he adored her. But more than gifts or grand gestures, the greatest thing he ever gave Caroline was his unwavering love. With no scandals to exploit, the tabloids turned to desperate measures. They were eager to recreate the chaos of Caroline's first marriage, so they resorted to fabricating it. Paparazzi went so far as to hire models in bikinis to pose near Stefano while they snapped misleading photos. But their plan failed spectacularly. Unlike her first husband, Stefano was completely faithful, and everyone knew it. With the media unable to shake her happiness, Caroline embraced her quiet, private life. For the first time, she found joy not in titles or status, but in the simple moments with her family. "It wouldn't bother me at all if I weren't Princess Caroline of Monaco," she admitted. "I prefer to be at home with my husband and children." Unfortunately, while she longed for peace and stability, Stefano's thrill-seeking nature meant he wasn't always content with the quiet life. Stefano had no interest in the party scene or the scandals that had plagued Caroline's past, but he had one weakness: danger. Speedboat racing was his passion, and he didn't just compete, he excelled. But while the sport gave him an adrenaline rush, it also terrified his loved ones. Caroline, along with his parents, pleaded with him to walk away before it was too late. They begged him to retire and focus on the family they had built together. At first, Stefano agreed. But there was one thing he couldn't let go of: his championship title. He promised that after just one last season, he would quit for good. What he didn't realize was that this would turn out to be the biggest mistake of his life. Fate tried to warn him. Just weeks before his final race, disaster struck: his boat exploded. Miraculously, he survived, and if there had ever been a sign to walk away, this was it. All he had to do was compete one last time, defend his title, and retire. His family had been waiting for this day for years. But the House of Grimaldi had never been known for catching a lucky break. And once again, tragedy was about to strike. During the race, Stefano and his co-pilot, Patrice Innocenti, made a split-second decision to stop and rescue a fellow competitor whose boat had caught fire. Their act of heroism cost them precious time, but that wasn't their only obstacle. The water conditions were worsening, visibility was decreasing, and one by one, other racers were dropping out. Each competitor had to decide whether to continue or call it quits. As Stefano's rivals withdrew, his parents anxiously prayed he would do the same. But he didn't. For Stefano, this race wasn't just about winning, it was about everything he had worked for. It was his final competition, his chance to defend his championship title, and, most importantly, it was a home race. He refused to give up. Determined to make up for lost time, he pushed harder. But then, disaster struck. His boat lost control and flipped in a horrific crash. While Patrice miraculously survived, Stefano wasn't so lucky. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but it was already too late. Stefano never stood a chance. At the time of the accident, Caroline was in Paris. The moment she heard the news, she rushed home, but there was nothing she could do except begin preparing for yet another heartbreaking funeral. Just when she had finally found happiness, it was ripped away from her. And the tragedy only deepened when the investigation began. Stefano's death was preventable, and that fact haunted Caroline. If only he had listened to the warnings. If only he had quit sooner. If only he hadn't pushed so hard. But the worst realization came when officials confirmed that his boat had serious safety issues. Had better regulations been in place, Stefano might have survived. In response to the accident, stricter safety measures were finally introduced, but for Caroline, that was little comfort. Then, the rumors started. Whispers of foul play spread quickly, and even some of Stefano's closest friends and family believed something wasn't right. A chilling detail soon emerged: just a week before his fatal race, Stefano had confided in those around him, saying, "I'm scared. Someone is out to get me. They won't succeed, but I think they'll make the attempt." At first, it sounded like paranoia. But as investigators looked deeper, it became clear that Stefano's death might not have been as straightforward as it seemed. Stefano had been living in fear long before his fatal accident, and, according to those closest to him, it wasn't without reason. His business dealings had reportedly made him some dangerous enemies, and as a result, he had received multiple death threats. Worse still, he had already experienced a few unnervingly close calls. His concerns weren't just paranoia. Even his surviving race partner, Patrice Innocenti, found the circumstances suspicious. Patrice later admitted, "I don't know what caused the boat to turn over. We'd been racing this boat for 4 years in all kinds of seas, and it had never happened before." As speculation and rumors swirled around Monaco, Caroline had reached her limit. At just 33, she had held many titles: princess, daughter, sister, wife, and mother. But now, she had the one she never wanted: widow. Unable to bear the constant whispers and the endless public scrutiny, she vanished. Taking her children with her, she left Monaco behind and disappeared into the quiet solitude of a small French village. For years, she stayed out of the spotlight, grieving away from the world's prying eyes. When she finally reappeared, her transformation left everyone stunned. Known for her timeless elegance, Caroline had always been a fashion icon. But when she stepped back into public view, she had shaved her head down to a buzz cut. The dramatic change sparked endless speculation. Was it a bold statement, or was it a sign that something was wrong? Unfortunately, it was the latter. Concerns grew until her brother, Prince Albert, stepped in to reassure the public. "It's only skin deep," he insisted. "Nothing serious. Other than that, she's fine." Caroline soon proved his words true, by diving headfirst into yet another scandal. Prince Ernst August of Hanover wasn't just a married man and a father of 2, he was also the husband of Caroline's friend. For years, rumors had swirled about a possible affair between them. Then, in 1997, speculation turned into reality. Ernst divorced his wife of 16 years to be with Caroline, sending shockwaves through their social circles. Ironically, Ernst had once been considered a suitable match for Caroline long before they ever became romantically involved. 2 years later, the palace made another unexpected announcement: Caroline and Ernst had secretly married. Unlike her previous husbands, Ernst was an aristocrat with royal lineage, making Caroline both a princess of Monaco and a princess of Hanover. Naturally, their marriage sparked intense gossip, especially when, just 6 months later, she gave birth to their daughter. When Ernst lost his temper, everyone around him suffered the consequences. One night, he called emergency services to his home, but when officers arrived, they were met with an intoxicated and aggressive Ernst. Instead of accepting help, he lashed out at them, earning himself a trip to jail. That wasn't his only brush with the law. He also learned the hard way that threatening employees can land you in serious trouble. And then, of course, there was the time he broke a cameraman's nose with an umbrella. As if his violent outbursts weren't bad enough, Ernst had another major flaw: he couldn't stay faithful. Caroline eventually realized the painful truth: how you get them is how you lose them. But Ernst didn't just betray her in private, he did it publicly. His affairs were well documented, splashed across tabloids for the world to see. One headline bluntly declared, "Monaco's First Lady is being publicly duped." Caroline had already endured a lifetime of humiliation, but this was a new level of disrespect. There was only so much she could take. At this point, Caroline's love life alone was enough to fuel the legend of the Grimaldi curse. In 2009, after catching Ernst with a French socialite, she finally walked away. Though they never formally divorced, they've lived separate lives ever since. Caroline returned to Monaco and never looked back, while Ernst continued to make headlines, this time, with a revolving door of much younger companions. But if there was one thing Caroline had learned over the years, it was how to guard her privacy. If there was a relationship she truly couldn't escape, it wasn't with Ernst, it was with the relentless media. She spent years fighting legal battles against the paparazzi, though with mixed results. It was no wonder she rarely gave interviews. Instead, she let her charity work, public appearances, and, of course, her scandals do the talking. And they did. Princess Caroline of Monaco has lived a life filled with both privilege and pain. Despite the heartbreak she has endured, she has remained a devoted mother, a dedicated philanthropist, and a symbol of grace and resilience. While she may not have found lasting happiness in love, she has continued to dedicate herself to Monaco and her family. What do you think about Princess Caroline's journey? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into royal history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.